Really excited about today's webinar, Secure Remote Support, Combating the Evolving Threat Landscape. And I would like to introduce our speakers today. So with today joining us is Katie Stewart, our Senior Product Marketing Manager.
Hey, everyone.
And Brian Thompson, our Principal Solutions Consultant at GoTo.
Hello, everyone. Welcome.
Well, welcome. So with that, I'll let you guys take it from here.
Thanks, Bonnie. So like Bonnie said, my name is Katie Stewart, Product Marketing Manager here at LogMeIn Rescue. I've been with the company for a little over 10.5 years, and I'm so excited to be here with you today to talk about the importance of security and remote support tools and how to navigate the evolving threats that we face. And in October, which is Cybersecurity Month, so it's just perfect. And I'm also excited to have my awesome co-presenter, Brian, with me today. Brian, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Katie. Brian Thompson. I've actually been with the company 15 years now. I started back in 2010. Previously, I was designing communication networks for utility companies in the Bay Area, as well as doing security for banks. So I'm excited to talk more about security and rescue and remote support.
Awesome, thanks. So Brian is the expert here, so I'm going to kick it off. And we're going to go over a few things. I'll be covering kind of what is the state of cyber threats, how do these attacks happen, what are some of the risks out there, and then I'll go over some interesting stats that are scary to see, but also I think some of them will help you figure out how to assess your own risks. And then Brian will jump on and we're going to talk about how do we address these risks with our IT solutions, remote support solutions specifically. And we'll also go over specific functionality, some which exists in our rescue product, but also just in general that you should be looking at in any tool that has different level of access to your systems. So excited to jump in. So we do have a mix of individuals that are participating on the webinar today, both current loyal customers that have been with us for a while, and it's great to see, I'm looking at the names, it's great to see some familiar names pop up. And we also have people that maybe don't know as much about Rescue. So I just wanted to take a second, I promise, just a second to establish a foundation to get everyone kind of on the same page. And for those of you that aren't as familiar with Rescue, give you a high level understanding of everything that Rescue does. So at its core, it is an enterprise level, powerful, flexible, technical remote support tool. But really, we know that not all remote support tools are built equal. Sure, they all offer remote control, but there are so many other things both in session and under the hood, which really makes Rescue kind of stand head and shoulders above the rest from its flexibility, customization, and security within the solution. So just to mention a few things, Rescue offers everything for multi-platform coverage from desktop to mobile with your Windows, Mac, iOS, Android, Linux, Chromebook capabilities. You have the ability to actually brand and customize your ecosystem to your workflows with 10 different connection methods for different reps, different entry points, different customers. There's unintended access for devices with no limits or restrictions on in-session functionality. A lot of powerful AI features like session summary, error analysis, features that help improve technician productivity and handle time. And so we actually will have a whole webinar on AI features next month for anyone who's interested in that, but we won't be getting into that today. And then we know everything doesn't always need that kind of big sledgehammer, get in there with remote control. Sometimes you can pinpoint or resolve the issue with diagnostics, things in the background, scripting capabilities, which saves you time. And we also include camera share functionality with Rescue Lens capability that's included in the product. And then today, we are going to talk all about security, including Rescue's robust security capabilities like granular permission controls, audit reports, SSO, AD Sync, and even some scam prevention features. So just a lot more than your basic break fix remote control. Everything really can take your support to the next level, save you time, make your team more efficient, and really delight the end users. So that's my little Rescue overview. But let's take a step back today and think about cybersecurity. What are some of the evolving things that you should be mindful of? And first and foremost, the rising financial cost of data breaches is skyrocketing. So these numbers are actually from an IBM report. They have this really great security report that they put out every year, and the stats come from that. These really compelling stats come from that. So it states that the average cost of a breach has increased 10% year over year. Later, I have some slides on the total cost of what really makes up a cost of a breach, not just, ransomware paid or potential downtime, but there's other reasons as well. And increased costs associated if you happen to have a breach. And more companies are getting impacted by breaches. And then on the other side, you see a stat about ransomware. So ransomware is one of the primary cyber threats today. And 80% of the time, they're starting from remote tools and technology. 80%. That's a wild number. The previous year, that number was actually at 58%. And so we're just seeing how much that's growing. Attackers are increasingly stealing data from people. Third-party ransomware attacks are on the rise, and supply chain attacks. But again, 80% of the time. And that's why it's imperative to go through where are these openings, and that's why we're talking about it today. We know security is top of mind for everyone. So I wanted to highlight, even just looking back, we're in 2025, looking back at last year. Let's take a look back at 2024 alone and some of the types of stories that have come out. And these things are very high profile. Large industries or places that you think would have secure technology are having these breaches. So, it's not like you can say it's these companies that aren't secure. It's targeting everyone. And so one that happened at the end of last year, for those that are familiar with the US Treasury, the hackers breached it through a remote access tool. Then we have healthcare attacks. There was actually a few in 2024 in the healthcare industry. From compliance and locking down the information side, we know healthcare is very secure, but there were even still two really big ones worth mentioning: the Ascension Health and Health Equity, both health records that got breached. Downtime in the Ascension Health took 6 weeks to actually fully restore all their services because of the ransomware attacks. And then two companies out there, and I promise you it's not because they're necessarily competitors of us, but these were two things that, again, shine light on the fact that tools that have nodes, that have hosts on devices, are inherently at risk, and again, why security is so important. So both TeamViewer and AnyDesk in 2014 suffered similar potential compromised networks and cyber attacks on their production systems. So not getting in through your techs or your users, but getting in through the technology itself. So what are those numbers showing? That organizations are suffering. Looking at these reports, 68% of organizations have suffered one or more successful endpoint breaches, and 81% of businesses have experienced endpoint malware attacks. But the good news is there are steps that can be taken to mitigate these risks. So before we jump into all of that, we have to think about, okay, well, where does the risk come from? Across all IT technology and cyber threats in general, what are the security risks? So I just want to, take a second and go over some of those. So how do these attacks happen? And you have methods that are both human-centric, and then there's the technology side of things. And both have inherent risks and inherent problems to them. So I want to talk about human-centric first. And this is where I think AI is really making an impact, and unfortunately here, not in a great way, because it's creating more advanced social engineering attacks and how things are actually being phished. Phishing or social engineering is being personalized through these AI experiences. So, reaching out to your employees or to your customers, positioning themselves at other locations, getting access to your systems from multiple different ways. I know our company itself, our IT teams send out kind of test phishing attempts that are these AI generated potential threats, so that they can see kind of, are the employees doing their due diligence? Because some of these are really, they're really good. there's something that they look real. So again, just something that AI has added to. Insider threats is also another thing that can't be taken lightly, and it might not be purposeful or even malicious. So I'm saying insider threats, not like, you have a worker that's disgruntled and decides to open up the keys to the kingdom. But more actually something that could be accidental. So thinking, if someone has left their laptop open in a coffee shop, then joins an unsecured network in certain places, or is using tools or open source technology that the company isn't approved or isn't locked down, that's putting you at risk. That's that insider threat. So again, not someone necessarily being malicious, it's more just someone making a mistake or doing something that they shouldn't be doing. And then the last one there is compromised credentials. I think what I read was 30% of these breaches kind of come through these compromised credentials. And that's things like repeat password. So again, this is that human-centric side. And then on the other side, we have tools and the technology that you're using today that can cause issues. So, so someone is deploying updates that they have malware that's penetrated and gone through. And so these are more like software vulnerabilities. And these could be things like third-party breaches, which I mentioned on the previous slide or two that could have led to some serious risk. And or it could just be misconfiguration, how you're setting up your software, how you're deploying it, how it's configured for your network. Is it locked the right way? So it's just not the underlying software itself, but how you're actually deploying it, how you're setting it up, how you're training others to use it. Like what are the access points or things being left open to potentially increase the risk for your organization? And then there's just the brute force side, right? There are these hackers that are going to go in and they're really just knocking their way through different technology and systems that you have to penetrate them. So break-ins, DDoS attacks, and things like that to really take over other devices and machines. So, this is how the attacks happen, but I wanted to go out and see, can we put some numbers to this? Can we look at what the impact would be? And so over 50% of attacks now start with credential theft. That's crazy. Greater than half the attacks start with credential attacks. And this is where it comes down to training your employees and making sure you have different types of multi-factor authentication and things set up. There was actually another study that Microsoft had put out that showed 99% of breaches, the accounts had no MFA set up on them. And that kind of blew my mind. In this day and age, that seems unacceptable to not have that second layer of protection. Next is the 48% of 2024 breaches stem from compromised vendor access. So outsourced IT support. They often have these broad privileges if you think about them. So that technology, that's going to help and manage and monitor and potentially make your lives easier from a technical support side. Could also come back and bite you if it's not done the right way. So with nearly half of them having accounted for those breaches, like I said, 48% in 2024. And then, I mentioned those healthcare breaches earlier. Those were a result of vendor credential theft that led to those major incidents. And so again, this is a vendor usually not working purposefully to make mistakes, but it's serious when you're looking at vendors to evaluate them, look at their habits, look at their security. It's so important because, they could put you at risk. And then that last one, in my opinion, is the easiest to be addressed. 70% of these vendor-related or software-related breaches involved over-permissioned accounts. Those are, when everyone has everything, when they have all the permissions, when, you can easily just set them up and click, give all or grant all access. You have people not taking the least privileged access type approach to users. And sometimes that's because a tool doesn't have granular permissions that it should. And sometimes it's just laziness. Laziness to define different roles. So there's a lot of learnings from that as well. So we want to talk, I said you have to, when you're looking at these different tools, when you're looking at different vendors, you have to, assess their security as well. And so we want to talk about considerations that you should have when deploying an IT tool like, say, LogMe and Rescue or anything else that has that level of access. So the first thing I want to go over is authentication mechanisms. These are weaker mechanisms that are put in place without password policies, without MFA offered or turned on or required. I've already mentioned the authentication today, which can prevent credential theft. Then, looking at patching or update controls, how much control do you have over patches that are pushed out with software and technology that's in your systems? Can you test them? Can you deploy them in small ecosystems? Can you confirm the validity of them? Or are they all just always pushed out, or how regularly are they pushed out? So having that level of understanding of which tools, if any, are good to be deployed on your host and ultimate control over that testing and visibility into that. So if we think about, I don't know if you guys remember, but the CrowdStrike situation where there was an update that was pushed out and took them out globally, it was because there wasn't that type of control that an IT person had that could have kind of tested that in small increments. So, just showing that on a global scale of what that could do. The next one there I have on the list is insufficient encryption. I'd hope in this day and age, any technology that's worth anything has high levels of encryption with data, which really makes those brute force attacks less likely. And then I previously mentioned access controls on the last slide, mentioning that many are being over permission. Like I said, we need to identify the least privilege access and start there. And so that to me can stop a lot of potential issues, both deliberately and just human error, especially around accessing or doing something somewhere that they shouldn't, and now you're compromised. So again, I know our system at work, we can't even access certain sites or do certain things because they really lock down our permissions. And then there I have monitoring and logging, which is another thing. I think this depends a lot on the organizations. If you're a more mature organization that kind of has built out your team, you may be auditing this more regularly. You can be notified if something seems off or something is being accessed. And so I think these levels of understanding, it's not just, is the tool secure, but what are the practices of the organization, right? Monitoring tools and things like that. And then the last one there is third-party integrations. And something to obviously be mindful of is if you're connecting to tools or to other solutions, which is almost a must have these days, is to make workflows more seamless. How do those connections work? Can you trust them? Where were they built? Were they built by valid sources, by the providers themselves? Where is the data being stored? And how is it being transferred back and forth? And how is any type of risks being addressed? So again, I'm pretty sure every company out there is using those third-party integrations. They make the day-to-day doing our job possible. But again, you have to assess risks when it comes to the integrations themselves. Okay, so I've done a lot of talking, but a lot of what we've been talking about is, centered around security tools. And I'd love to know, how often do you conduct a security review of your current software? So is it annually, every 2 years, every 3 to 5, only on the initial purchase, never? So Brian, I don't know, I know you talk to a lot of customers. Do you hear feedback about this when you're talking to them? Do you hear that a lot of customers are doing this yearly or?
Yeah, I think we're seeing a change. I think, maybe every year was probably pretty common, but I think we're starting to see a shorter time period because of the fact that things change so quickly, especially with AI, like you mentioned. So I'm starting to see more like every 6 months, maybe not a major one, but they are looking, are we doing the right thing? Can we improve, our security posture?
That's great. I love to hear that people are actually doing it more often. I think the scary thing is when you don't do it as often, you kind of do that, and I see a couple people maybe here, and I'll give you another second to push this poll, but only at that initial response, that's a little bit scarier.
Yeah.
Because people come in and they're very thorough with the reviews up front and at the renewal time, but it's good to hear that people are coming back in and checking out either annually or even every 6 months.
But I think it's also important that people are attending webinars like this, because they don't know what you don't know that's out there, right? So I think we're going to be talking about some things today that people may not be aware that even existed, right? That hey, this could really secure our network down or our processes. So I'm excited to share some of those thoughts of what we're doing here at Logging In.
Yeah, I'm excited to get you back on. So yeah, just to wrap up this poll, it's nice to see that almost 80% of you are saying annually or more frequently. So that is great. And for those of you that are only doing it at that initial purchase, I'm definitely not trying to play scare tactics or anything here, but hopefully after today, you'll maybe try to go back and understand potential risks. And if you're a smaller organization, come look at what we have to offer, that we're trying to do things to kind of help you mitigate some of those risks. Awesome. So let's talk about the real cost of security. So one of the numbers I mentioned earlier in the webinar, I said there had been a 10% increase to the total cost associated with breaches. But what really plays into that? Where is this impact come from? Where are these costs associated? And from that similar IBM report that I mentioned earlier, the average cost of a breach last year was 4.8 million. And that's the attackers that are stealing data. They're encrypting it, they're locking it down from ransomware standpoint to significantly drive breaches, the breach costs higher. And the longer an incident lives, the higher the cost. So if you don't have an immediate remediation plan, you can assume that that's going to escalate pretty quickly. So I think people think about ransomware as something that needs to be paid out or data that I need to get back access to. But the other thing, though, is what's impacting the day-to-day standpoint. So 75% of breaches costs come from the actual business disruption and that post-breach response. And this goes back to that idea of having an incident response plan set up and ready to go. So if worst case scenario, how quickly can it be identified and how quickly can you remediate it to lower this downtime, which continues to eat up your costs and your reputation. Because let's say if an organization is in the news for any type of breach or incident, you're going to have a serious risk with your current customers. You're probably going to lose some business because they no longer trust you. If there's technology that's had an issue, even if they were never really impacted, some security leaders and CISOs say that it's a non-negotiable. Like, hey, we're going to just cut and run. And so they don't want to work with an organization at that point. And it's not just customers, it's prospects as well. It's your reputation when someone's looking into you. And then lastly, for those that are in, a regulatory space, those regulatory fines for HIPAA settlements and GDPR class action lawsuits can escalate quickly and exceed millions of dollars. So you have to be careful there as well. So how can we mitigate some of these problems and what can we do? So there are two ends to it really, if you think about it. So let's talk about vendor evaluation on the one side there. So as you're analyzing or looking at vendors, like I mentioned earlier, one thing to think about is certifications that they have. Do they have SOC 2? Do they have SOC 3? Depending on your regulations, are they HIPAA compliant or HIPAA compatible? So if you look at those certifications, it'll give you some foundation to understand if this is a serious company. Are their processes secure? Are they following rigorous processes? Next is product documentation or technical documentation. So making sure you're reviewing and understanding that piece of it. How do they roll out updates? What do I have access to? What happens if there's an issue? Which kind of rolls right into the support. What is the support that I will get if I notice something strange in my account or something weird in my logins? What kind of information can you provide to me from a customer standpoint? And then be specific, ensure they understand that your use case, your problems, your concerns, and ensure you have them answer those questions. And so then on the other side, and I think I touched on this a little bit earlier, that's that human error, right? And that is where there's a lot bigger risks. Like we saw earlier that 50% of breaches start with compromised credentials. You can have the best evaluation vendor of a vendor in the world, and it's not going to prevent that, right? So it takes extra effort on your side, but the return at lowering the risk from a security standpoint when you do things like training and empowering your employees from a security standpoint, I would say that makes it a non-negotiable. Okay, so let's talk about features. What about actual functionality? But before I do that, I just want to level set because I think some people sometimes confuse, we talk about unattended, remote access, remote support, ad hoc support, and there's different risks in both of that. So, for our purposes today, I just kind of want to bring that up. And again, just kind of level set both of them. So when we say unattended remote access or unattended support, that is something that there is something deployed on a device. So there's a pre-installed host software. It has admin level of access already on that device. And these are usually things that are managed and owned, technology-owned endpoints that you have out there. And then on the other side, there's the traditional ad hoc technical remote support. And that usually doesn't have a pre-deployed device out there or pre-deployed host. There's usually an end user that is required there. There are unmanaged endpoints, and that entry level leaves more of a risk for, say, social engineering and phishing exercises. So not the brute force that you're going to have more of your human error on the ad hoc remote side compared to the unattended support side. Which brings me to our next poll. So I'd love to know, do you primarily use that unattended support or ad hoc for your support? And so, yeah, again, you could say, one or the other, both, neither. Really just trying to get an understanding of what kind of the people who have joined us today, what is your day-to-day? What are you using? Hopefully this is a fast one, so we'll give it another few seconds. And then I promise I'm done talking. And you're going to get to hear from my fabulous co-presenter, Brian. Wow. Okay. I think we can go ahead and end the poll. And I think from what I'm seeing, we're almost seeing it straight down the middle. So, we have about a third of you using unattended. We have about a third of you using ad hoc, and then about a third of you using both. Awesome. Well, thank you for that. And like I said, I'm going to hand it over to Brian.
Thank you, Katie. Yeah, I don't know how many times we've had polls that were so close. 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And I think if a lot of IT people had their way, it would probably be all unattended, right? Because that way I can get connected to a device whether that end user is there or not, but that's not always possible, right? So that's when we're using ad hoc, or as we notice that there's a combination, right? Hey, servers, we definitely need to go in unattended, but others will just depends on who and what we're supporting. Go ahead and what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk in general when it comes to IT support. What can we do to make sure it's mostly secured, right? One of the things that we highly recommend here at LogMeIn and Go To is MFA, right? So that if somebody did get access to your account and they try to log in, they would not be able to do it unless they got a text message, or they had their app ready, or they had biometrics to show that they could prove who they say they are. Single sign-on is another one that we highly recommend. For the end user, it's a lot easier, right? You don't have to remember a bunch of passwords. You can go ahead and authenticate yourself with your IDP, whatever you're using, but then you're logged in. But on the flip side, when it comes to the organization, the security, if somebody leaves the organization, you want to be able to shut them off right away. So all of our products do integrate with single sign-on. And again, we highly encourage that. About 4 years ago, there was a situation where an HR director for a software company, an accounting software company, left the organization, or not by her own choice. She was let go, but nobody was turned off her access. You can Google this, but she went in and deleted like 17,000 resumes. It set that company back like months, as well as cost them a lot of money, and all because they did not have that level of saying, hey, we're going to let this person go, we're going to work with IT. As soon as we shut that person off in Entra ID or AD, whatever it was at the time, they lose all their permissions to log in. You don't have to go into each one of the different apps and turn them off at that point there. If those are not an option, or at least a single sign-on, well, making sure that the complexity level of the passwords, right, not fluffy 1, 2, 3. You need to make sure that these aren't something that can be guessed. It includes names. You want it to be longer and complex. In addition to that, you want to, and one of the slides you mentioned earlier was need to have permissions, right? Not doing a blanket permission. You want to be able to control what they have access to and what they can do once they're in there. And then that leads into the audit, right? Who did what, where, and when? And is that the level of permission that they need? And then the encryption, again, 256 AES encryption, that is the standard. That is what you expect to get in any software that you're using today. Okay, so when we actually talk about an actual session, right, how does LogMeIn Rescue do it? Right, so one is that we have a one-time code. So if I send Katie a PIN code and she clicks on it, I'm able to get in and help her. But I can't get back into her machine unless we go through the process again. I can't click on that icon, or she can't accidentally click on that and start a new session that she's not aware of. That it would have to be a new PIN there. We also, if she felt as though somebody was doing something that maybe they shouldn't be doing, they're getting into like her files or email pictures, that she's able to end that session, right? Because she should be in control. Now, there are situations where you're going into a device and maybe you want to lock that person out. Well, we have that option as well, but you really need to know who are your audience. Are these internal people, or are you being provided support from an outside organization? So we're going to talk about some of the other things that we're able to do as far as to lock down the remote support session. When there's an old saying that goes by that, back here, I think I skipped twice, click twice, that hackers generally don't break in, they get invited in, right? And that's that human element. So, we talked about policies, we're going to talk about it a little bit more. But you don't want to just manage by policies, right? You don't want to give, years ago, it used to be easy to give everybody admin access to their devices, right? They could download any software. That didn't work out so good, right? Even though you may have told them, don't download anything that you don't know what it is, people still did. Oh, I'm curious if somebody recommended this. That doesn't always turn out to be very positive. Really what you want to do is be able to block it on the policy level, but really so that they have no choice. They cannot download, right? And that's by not making them admin on the machines. So some of the things we're working on here at LogMeIn is really locking down the machine so your end users, can't make a mistake, right? They can't have to wait for their best judgment, that they don't have access to, giving somebody unauthorized user access to their device. And some of the things that we're able to do here, and probably the biggest one, is device-based restricted access. We're going to dive into that a little bit more, but that's really what our customers have been waiting for. We've had it for almost a year right now, and it really takes securing your remote support session to a new level. We have IP-based restrictions. That can work in some situations. Maybe I don't want my technicians going home and providing support for their families or their friends, or obviously doing something unethical using our company account. But maybe you also want to make sure that, hey, if our technicians are going to support our end users, it has to come from our network. So they have to be on our domain in order to provide remote support, even log in. We can also have that if you're an enterprise customer, that you can have your own URL, right? So we use LogMeIn123. It's our generic, hey, go to this website, put in your PIN code. But if you're a large organization and you want to have your own enterprise domain, that is available. We can also verify that only employees can only get into a session with people from their own company. That means the PIN code that I generate that you may put in on your website or on the calling card needs to come from somebody from within our organization. You know, I can't, as maybe a trial user, send you a link or give you a PIN code because it wouldn't work. You'd say this is an unauthorized technician. So we really looking to secure that whole process so you know who you're given access to. So device-based restricted access. All right, so if you take away anything from today, this might be the biggest one right here. What this does is says that, hey, the only people that you can get in session with is somebody from your own organization. As I talked about the PIN code, but it doesn't matter which method that the hacker is trying to get in touch with you. If I was to call and say, hey, Katie, this is Brian from IT. Hey, listen, we need to use Rescue again to, I need to fix your computer. I see some things are happening to it. And if I was outside the organization, I would not be able to connect to it. I would send her the PIN code. I'd direct her to, hey, go to this website, put in the PIN code, and it would say, this is an unauthorized user. Please contact your IT department. Now, we know this is a big scam. In fact, several years ago, my daughter was working on that computer right there, and she got a call from Windows Security, allegedly. Now, I thought everybody knew this. And she's really smart. She graduated college. She was in college at the time. She graduated college within 3 hours. But she also maybe lived in a bubble. She was very trusting, right? And I know a lot of our employees like that as well. So they're like, oh, pull up this event code. Are you getting a bunch of stuff popping up? And sure enough, it was, and that's normal. So they had to go to AME, which is a remote support tool. And they got access to my computer. They put a ransomware note saying, hey, donate, contribute $500 in Bitcoin in order to get your device back. She called me, told me what happened. I have everything backed up, so I was able to wipe that device right away. And you know, $400 or $500, that's one thing. Locking up the devices out there. But what if it was more malicious than that? Maybe they wanted to get in, and I had my tax papers on there, my personal information, banking information was on that. So it could have been a whole lot worse. So now, obviously, we have a lot of tools to prevent that. But from a company organization, what you really want to do is look at this DRAP, because of the fact that it can say that even if that scammer tried to get in session, and maybe we block some of the other tools that are out there, right? And say, hey, the only tool you can use is Rescue, but within that, the only Rescue account that our employees can use would be the ones that are coming. The technicians are valid technicians from our organization. So some of the things we can do is we can manage the permissions that the technician can do once they're on there, right? Maybe they don't need full access to it. Maybe they don't need to grab files from that remote machine, right? If you need to do that, maybe only tier 2 people can do that. So we'll talk about a few of the other methods over here, but we'll talk about how DRAP actually works. Again, an approved technician, right, will then generate a code and send it to the end user. That end user will then go ahead and enter that code. They will download the applet, which will then check to make sure that matches with the company. And what it's a token. It is something that is pre-installed, but it's not unattended, right? An end user still has to be there to accept that session. It's not running as a service. It's really just setting a token within your registry that has to verify with the technicians. At that point, once it is verified, then you can start the download process and get in the session there. So you're really eliminating any type of concern that an outside employee, knowing that you may use Rescue, is then trying to compromise that or use that against the employee who thinks, oh, okay, yeah, that's what we use internally right here. We share that with our customers, and they love it. I mean, in fact, the quotes have been like, that's exactly what we need, right? Because you're really protecting the organization. So some of the things that we actually have talked about is, making sure that that PIN code is coming from the right organization. If you're using a calling card today, if not, I highly recommend you look into it, because that is another security method that says, hey, without just clicking on, an email or going to a website and putting in this PIN code, that the end user clicks on an icon on their desktop. They could either put in their name or that PIN code there. That helps get around firewalls as well, because of the fact that that's the only way, and that calling card only works with your technicians. So that is another secured method, and this is verifying that that PIN code is coming from within your organization. Okay. A few other things you can do is that, some organizations, some very large organizations that you know the names, that, Fortune 100 companies that use Rescue as well, they don't even go to LogMe123. They will actually embed it onto their own site. So that way you can actually go in and say, hey, in order to get in a session, you have to go to our own website, right? This is our company domain. Bottom left-hand corner, there is a box right there. Go ahead and put in the 6-digit PIN, and that way it is only good for your organization, so you can limit it that they're not going to any generic website. Okay, so when we talked about the different layers that Rescue can keep your organization secure, you see we have a lot of different methods there. Although, again, as I mentioned, that the DRAP is probably going to be the most powerful one, because it doesn't matter which way you're trying to get in the session with, calling card, the website, PIN code, that only your employees will only be able to get in session with a technician from your account. We also talked about, hey, even if that employee, a technician went rogue or left the organization, we can shut them off right away, because we know that we've implemented single sign-on, and as soon as we shut them off an Entra ID or AD, then we can go ahead and they're going to lose access to all of their tools, including Rescue. A little bit of delay in advancing there, but Katie, I think we kind of drilled home the
You
difference.
really did, yeah.
Able to lock down.
Thank you, yeah. Oh, and before we get to questions, I think there's one more poll, and that's just kind of, would you like to see a demo of these features that Brian was talking about? Because again, as he mentioned, at its core, Rescue is a secure remote support tool. And what kind of he went over today with DRAP and some of these other features, that's part of our advanced security package. So, do you need, are we saying that Rescue without this enhanced security package is not secure? Absolutely not. I want to make sure that that's 100% clear. It's these advanced security features will take you to the next step, to take you to the next level, have that things like DRAP and lock it down even more, those scam prevention features. So we can close that out, and then we can jump over to questions, because you've heard enough from us at this point. So I'm just pulling the questions up. Let's see. I think one of the questions we had, Brian, are any suggestions to getting adherence to security policies?
Yeah, so one of the things we talked about is that, it's one thing to come out with a policy that says, hey, don't do this or be careful of this, right? But again, at Rescue, we try to take that a step further by saying, hey, we eliminate that possibility of our employees making a mistake or them having to figure out, hey, is this secure or not? That if you can block those methods of that they would not be able to get in a remote support session with somebody outside the organization, I think that eliminates threat as well as the stress on the employees there.
Thank you. Great answer. This is one, and I'm glad, because I think this was probably at the beginning of the presentation, but we got someone who said they use Resolve, go to Resolve, log me in Resolve, and they were really wondering what's the differences with Rescue and why choose kind of one over the other. So that's a great question. Brian, I don't know if you have your little pitch that you've said probably 100 times.
There is a lot of overlapping, with, if you're looking for an RMM tool that's going to do your Windows updates, it's going to do your patching, PowerShell scripting, that may be more of a Resolve. If you're more of an IT help desk, lots of users where reporting is really important when it comes down to real granular, what IP address was the technician on, what IP address was the end user on there. Both products actually have integrations with, our third-party tools. So there's going to be similarities there. But DRAP, when you're not using unattended, where that's not really an option, I think it has to be Rescue, because of the fact that we don't have DRAP for Resolve. Resolve's a great tool. I mean, our customers really love it. But I think, when it's more of an ad hoc support session, I think Rescue is probably a little stronger there.
I was gonna say, yeah, Resolve is probably more for your SMB, that mid-level, where, Rescue, again, like you just said, is that enterprise, can be way more granular, more powerful. And that kind of is a follow-up question that someone here said, how does Rescue approach zero trust remote access? And I think that's a good point and a good thing to clarify is that Rescue is that enterprise remote support tool, not the remote access side of things. So if that's something that you're more interested in, definitely take a look kind of at Resolve.
Yep.
So the next question we had come in, and this is a great question at its core, is Rescue Lens included in the plan? So we talked about two things today. We talked about Rescue and we talked about our enhanced security package. So I'm not sure if that's what you were kind of talking about the plan, but Rescue Lens is actually a part of Rescue, a camera sharing capability, and we also have a standalone Rescue Live Lens. So those are two things. You don't need to have the enhanced security package for that. That comes, the camera sharing ability comes in Rescue.
And with the web technicians console, now they're actually going to be integrated together. In the past, you could be using the technicians console, the desktop technicians console, but then you'd have to go to the browser for Lens. Now that we have the web technicians console, those are actually going to be kind of blended in together. So, hey, I want remote support, or I just want to see the camera share.
Exactly. Yeah. Try to make your lives easier that you don't have to switch back and forth. Everything is, accessible in the same platform. One of the questions that we got a lot of great questions. So make sure that if you do have them, keep rolling them in here. But it says, how does Rescue ensure that AI models used for support, like incident summarization, are not introducing new data leakage vectors?
Oh, okay. Yeah, that question comes up in a lot of demos right there. So, what we're doing is actually it's the summary. So, and I'm glad that they're familiar with the summary because, and that is something just for those who may not be familiar with what we're talking about here. We integrate with a lot of help desks. ServiceNow is probably the number one there, but Freshservice and Jira, Salesforce. But the notes that go into a ticket are only as good as the notes that the technician enters, right? And a lot of times if Katie can't print, Katie couldn't print, fixed printer, closed ticket. Well, that doesn't really tell me what worked and what didn't work, right? So what the AI note taking or summary does, it actually goes through, and as I'm going through these different steps, I opened up this, I downloaded this, got an error message right here. It's part of our AI package. So the way that works when it comes to the session summary is, it actually waits for the recording and it's going to review that. So the AI is not going through your system to try to find, different things. It's actually doing what's on the recording.
Yeah, and if you want to learn any more about AI, because I know AI is a totally separate topic, that we will have a webinar later next month on this, which will go more in specifics. But just making sure that I also cover when we're talking about AI, we're very careful that we're not using your information to help learn or anything of that sort. We have entire documentations on how our AI tool is secure, because we know that that's a big question. If someone's going to implement any of our AI tools, they need to go back to their company and say, is this AI tool or tools secure? And so we have an entire documentation on that, and we'll touch on that in the next AI webinar. I have a question. Does Rescue offer API level audit visibility so that customers can correlate session logs with their own observing tools?
Like a SIEM there, yeah. It does. I mean, we have the full suite of APIs that we integrate when it comes to start a session, take notes and put it back into a help desk there. But we're actually improving on that area as well for like the SIEM type products that are out there. Whether it be what took place as far as activities, did you add a technician, did you remove a technician, did you add permissions to it there? By being able to get that into a SIEM product there. So it could be a little better, and it is something we're working on there. But when it comes to the AI and the note taking and the sessions, those are full APIs. And we do have, either through like an email or an upload through through like a URL that is able to upload that information to get that into your third-party product.
Awesome, thanks, Brian. For larger enterprise managing global endpoints, how does Rescue help balance security compliance like GDPR, like HIPAA, with usability and response time?
Yeah, so since we are a global company, in fact, we have offices throughout the EMEA, throughout APAC region there, we do have to abide by that. But we don't just limit it to like EMEA needs GDPR. We throughout the organization that we have that, and we meet those compliances as far as to giving access, to removing information that's on there. When it comes to HIPAA, we do have a nice HIPAA document on that. Although there's not necessarily a HIPAA compliance certification that we can get. But when it comes to stuff that we can control, like the encryption level that we talked about, 256 and others, that we do meet that. And it's all in that documentation. Quick Google or go to our support page of HIPAA. You're able to pull that information up. Of course, we do all the compliance when it comes to the SOC reports like that you mentioned to make sure that it's not just us saying that we're secure, that we got third parties also agreeing that, we are taking the right steps. We may not have every bell and whistle, but security and reliability have been the big things we focused on.
And it's really also how I'd say how you use the tool. Like we have the ability to be HIPAA compliant, but if you start, like Brian was saying today, giving everyone access to everything, that's not going to very much help you there. And we are, like Brian just said, we are GDPR compliant because we are an international global company. And then I think I have one last question here. How would you use Rescue if there was an incident response coordination needed, if a customer detects suspicious activity? This one says through a session maybe, or just any suspicious activity? Like how would Rescue help, or how could you use Rescue to help?
Yeah, so it would rely on a third party, most likely your endpoint security, your XDR, EDR, it's going to notify you. Typically what would happen is that, that would also create a ticket within your ITSM product, in which case then a technician could use Rescue, see that a ticket came in, it's notifying that a bunch of files are being deleted or encrypted, and that's not common. Obviously now it's going to rely a lot on the behavioral engine, right? To say, hey, that's not common. What we really need to do is lock that, that machine down. But then Rescue, depending on, at what level is that machine locked down or and compromised, using Rescue to get in there. To do what you can. Obviously, in a situation like that, if it really is a threat, you're going to be limited, but at least you don't have to have somebody on the ground there unless you totally get locked up.
Awesome. Thank you. I think that's all the questions we had. These are some great questions. I love when you want to pick our brains, and we'll also follow up. We're going to be sending some more security data sheets and things like that. So if you do have any questions, you can always follow up after that. And if you did raise your hand for someone interested in a demo, you could be paired with someone, get lucky and get paired with someone like Brian, who can kind of tailor and go through all these questions specifically for you and your company. All right, so I don't see any new questions coming in. So again, thank you so much. Thank you, Brian, for joining me here. I'm glad to hear from you all, and hope to see you in the future. And thanks for celebrating Cybersecurity Month with us, talking about security here. All right, thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you, everyone.